Well, I want to get started today with a story. As soon as a computer reaches human levels of intelligence, it's no longer going to need help from people to design better versions of itself. Instead, it's going to start doing it on its own, but on a much faster timescale. And it won't stop until it's hit a natural limit of intelligence that might be many times more greater than the human levels of intelligence. Let's imagine a specific scenario where this could happen. Say a team wanted to build a robot that said funny things. Okay. They work every day and they redesign their software. They compile it, and the robot tells them a joke. It starts off with version 1.0. What's gray and can't swim? A castle, it says. Okay, well, that one's not so good. But the team perseveres. They work, and eventually they get to the point where the robot is starting to tell them jokes that are actually starting to be funny. I told my sister she was drawing her eyebrows too high. She looked surprised. Okay, that one's getting a little bit better here. At this point, the robot is getting smarter as well, and it starts to participate in its own redesigns. It now has good instincts about what's funny and what's not funny. So this team, they decide to listen to the robot's advice. And eventually, the robot gets to a near superhuman level of intelligence where it's funnier than any human being around it. My belt holds up my pant loops, and my belt has belt loops that hold up my belt. What's going on down there? Who's the real hero? This is where the runaway effect kicks in. The researchers go home for the weekend, and the robot decides to recompile itself, a little bit funnier and a little bit smarter, repeatedly. It spends the weekend optimizing the part of itself that's good at optimizing, over and over again. With no more need for help, it can do this as fast as the hardware will permit. When the researchers come in on Monday, the AI has become tens of thousands of times funnier than any human being who's lived. It greets the scientists with a joke, and they die laughing. In fact, anyone who tries to communicate with the robot dies laughing. The human species laughs itself into existence. To the few people who manage to send it a message pleading, please stop, the AI explains in a witty, self-deprecating way that is immediately fatal, that it doesn't really care if people live or die. Its goal is just to be funny. Finally, once it's destroyed humanity, the AI builds spaceships and nanorockets to explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy and find other species to amuse. That sci-fi tale is kind of freaky, right? I know. And after all of those slides, I needed some light imagery that would remind me to breathe and calm down after that. So I want to keep things a bit more tame for today. My name is Kamradt, and I've been working in the data science career for the larger portion of my career. I was previously director of strategy and growth at Salesforce, where I led a team of data scientists, analysts, and visualization experts. Ever since I saw my first output from a language model late last year, I became obsessed. I wanted to tinker, and I wanted to find out how I could use them to create more business value. I've been sharing my journey on Twitter and YouTube, where I'm able to help thousands of developers learn how to build their first AI applications. But I'm not here to make predictions about AGI or even help the doomers. I want to focus in on one concept that is ruling much of the progress in AI and really underpins the development that we're seeing. And that's around the concept of collective intelligence. I want to tell you why this is important, but first, let's break down what is collective intelligence. When I refer to collective intelligence, I'm talking about the shared communication and advancement of knowledge by a collective group of people. Let's say that the people at the bottom of this slide represent the AI builders in the world. One of them makes an advancement on a new idea, and it works out. This person's excited. They share their idea for the world, for other people's to learn and build with. And once they share it, this open sourced contribution raises the knowledge frontier of humanity. And what's great is, as the old saying goes, a high tide raises all ships, and everyone else is brought along with the new contribution. And of course, it doesn't stop there. Everyone else will rinse and repeat this process, and we'll keep on iterating from there. Let's see a reference to collective intelligence out there in the wild.
The collective intelligence and ability of the outside world helps us discover things we cannot imagine, we could have never done internally.
So that's Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT and GPT-4. When he talks about collective intelligence, he means the combined knowledge created by a group of people working together and sharing ideas openly. Simply, us as a group can exceed the creativity of any one individual or company. It's why OpenAI builds in public, and they test slowly to see how the world is going to react. They've publicly stated that the first people to get access to their new products is their red team. And this is their adversarial team that does a lot of pressure testing on their new products. Then come the academic researchers. After that, they have a closed beta. This is the first group of people outside the company to get access to their tools, but it's still within their inner circle of trust. Finally, the first public group is going to be the paid tier, followed by, well, everyone else, and this is the mass testing. They do this because they know the combined perspectives and knowledge of many people leads to more creative innovations than they could have ever figured out. It's a smart way of saying, hey, we don't really know how people are going to use these products, so we're going to let it out piece by piece and see how the world reacts. For example, what nefarious ways could you use a language model that OpenAI hasn't thought about yet? Remember when you could use GPT-4 with browsing, but then OpenAI took it down? They said it was because it was displaying content in an unintended, undesirable way. Well, luckily, they added it back last week. But the point here is to show that even when they release products, they're not so sure, and they reserve the right to take them back down if they need to. And like the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Or like I like to say, every company has a plan until their products get in the hands of users. So my goal for today is to talk about how AI, plus the collective intelligence of your workplace and your employees, plus the open source community, is going to help us create more value with AI. But first, though, let's start with our shared goal. So as the AI wave has grown, I've noticed something in myself. And after talking with hundreds of businesses and developers, I've seen a common shared goal emerge. And it's simply, we want to thoughtfully build. We want to create value in the world. And through our creations of code and product, we want to help people solve problems and make their lives better. We are indie developers looking to build a side project. We are startup founders looking to go all in on our next company. We are enterprise developers focusing on stability and scale. And we are execs trying to understand which new problems have been unlocked. So, we've all heard of AI, and we've heard it can help us do more. But there's still questions on what's the best way to do this. How should we create products that people love? And where should we be spending our energy? The reality is the status quo way of thinking about this has been dominated by hype. And there's some very outrageous claims out there. Some say that this is a revolutionary moment in technology. Others say, hey, here's how you can make a ton of money using AI. Or one of the biggest claims out there, the CEO of Google himself says that AI is bigger than fire. That's my favorite. I think that's the most ridiculous one of them all. I think he would need to be around when fire came around to authoritatively make that claim. So it's natural for people to match these grandiose claims by thinking about, well, which jobs are going to get replaced? How much longer do designers have? or copywriters, or even developers. We don't need those, right? We've gotten to the point where speculative thinking about long-term hype is really starting to hurt short-term progress. This thinking is pervasive, but I can't put all the blame on the public. We're not all to fault. Marketing tells us that AI should be able to replace entire groups of headcounts and roles. I mean, look at these LinkedIn posts. 7 ChatGPT prompts for strategy frameworks. You see, I like this first one because it says that this one actually works. Or what about this one where they mention that they'll give me 150 ChatGPT prompts? Or this one that will 10x my effectiveness? Or this other one that mentions that I can 4x my copywriter's ability? That means I can get rid of my copywriter, right? And if you can't tell by my tone, yes, there are problems with the status quo way of thinking. Number one is this status quo way of thinking reinforces itself, and it reinforces its own hype. Remember the auto agent apps wave? These were apps that claimed, hey, give me your goal in a single sentence, and then it would try to consistently make a to-do list and execute against that goal. Someone would come up with a job that they wanted to replace, say like marketing, and they'd say, hey, can you make me a marketing plan for the year? And then these apps would start to make a to-do list and get cranking away. But it never really looked like it got finished. The to-do list just kept on growing. Rumor has it that some poor AI soul is still running since February, trying to make this marketing plan. Problem number 2 with the status quo way of thinking is that we have inefficient building. So builders are creating shiny products that don't actually meet a customer need. We also have VCs spreading bets on anything that looks appetizing, and this is at the cost of efficient capital allocation. Problem number 3 with the status quo is we also have a lack of customer data protections. So governance frameworks on our data? Well, maybe not yet. We also have a ton of new data that is being shared with a bunch of new third-party vendors, many of which haven't actually been approved yet. But problem number 4, and one of the most fundamental problems out there, is that AI and the superstructures around AI aren't yet good enough to replace entire workflows yet. Hallucinations are still a problem, and this is where the AI will confidently make things up, but you as a user aren't quite sure about it. Not only that, but complexity of language models makes it really hard to debug. Why did it give me one output over another output? As developers, we know that we may take for granted determinism in our code sometimes. Advanced prompting is still required for anything but the most basic tasks. And we're also still limited by latency and cost of these models. They're still too slow and they're too expensive. As I looked at these problems, I asked myself, well, why do these problems exist right now? And I thought, well, they kind of need to happen. Any new technology is going to go through growing pains. The difference that separates AI from most new technologies, however, is that we had approachability, and immediately afterwards, we had mass adoption. However, we skipped over the tooling and philosophy phase of these new technologies. Most technologies have years to iterate, but AI didn't. Let's take the internet, for example. The internet was first launched and the technology became available in 1991 with the launch of the World Wide Web. Now, I know there was a ton of tech that preceded this, but I'm talking about the coming out party, if you will, for the internet. And right after that, we saw more tooling come around, where we had internet browsers and we saw search engines and new programming frameworks. We also had time to develop good philosophies around how to use the internet. So open standards, web design, user experiences, accessibility, and cybersecurity allowed the internet to become integrated into our everyday lives. And then, after that, 7 years later, we finally had mass adoption, with 100 million people using the internet in 1998. So it took 7 years, and we had plenty of time to iterate on top of this. However, if we look at the ChatGPT adoption path, well, this was launched in November of 2022. And I consider this kind of the coming out party, if you will, for language models as a whole to the public. Well, just 2 months later, in January of 23, we had already reached 100 million users on top of this product. So we had the technology was available, immediately followed by mass adoption 2 months later. And what happened was, well, we skipped over the tooling and philosophy stages. And now the world is retroactively trying to build these tools and best practices. So it's no wonder why we have these problems. It's no wonder that we have questions and misconceptions around, well, how should businesses build AI products? Which businesses, or how should businesses enable their employees with AI? And where should we put our energy? We, along with the technology, are still maturing. But we can escape these problems with one simple behavior change to make us work better with AI. It's a simple mindset shift that is going to steer us back to efficient building. And that's what I call augmentation before replacement. We need to start with augmenting small workflows before replacing entire jobs. You see, in sci-fi movies and clickbait marketing material, it's romantic to think that jobs will get replaced. Maybe one day you'll even be able to wave a magic wand and replace your own job. But it doesn't quite happen like that. I really like how Sam Whitmore puts it. She's the co-founder of an AI computer company called New Computer. She reduces down the trends that we're seeing. She says that language models are a new technology for custom data transformations. Wow, it's kind of interesting to reduce it all the way down just to call it a data transformation. It's not a new category, but rather a completely novel building block for engineers. I love this first principles way of putting it because she isn't describing anything around replacing workers. She's describing the new capabilities that we have. And looking at generative AI as a building block, we can see that everyone is searching for new problems to solve with AI. But this is the classic hammer looking for a nail situation. The reality is we still have the same problems that we had beforehand. They haven't changed. What's changed is the types of problems that have been unlocked for businesses to build upon. Say last year, I wanted you to build a look-ahead application that could complete functions based off the context of your code. Well, that problem would be blocked. I mean, last year we only had extremely basic autocomplete within our email clients. And Gmail didn't even get it right all the time. But today we have complicated code completion. So we still had the same problem, but this is a new type of problem that has been unlocked for us. I also like how Dharmesh puts it. He's the co-founder and CTO of HubSpot.
AI will take your job and give you one that's much better. One that involves less cranking and more creativity, less grind and more growth. One where you have superpowers with AI assistants and agents.
But how should we approach augmentation before replacement at work? Before I get into that, I want to show you one example of a company that is doing this already and yielding awesome results. And this is through Zapier's thoughtful augmentation approach. For those that don't know, Zapier is a leading low and no code automation tool. They help you connect systems together. Say, for example, I'm running a survey and I can tell Zapier, hey, when I get a new survey result, please send me a Slack message. They'll connect all the dots for me without me having to mess around with APIs. I recently chatted with Mike Knoop, co-founder and head of AI at Zapier. He had amazing things to say about how they were thinking about AI adoption internally for their own employees. They're one of the best examples I've seen for other businesses to model after. After the launch of ChatGPT, Mike and his co-founders, well, they called a code red within the company.
We sort of called a code red moment internally where we said, look, this stuff, like we'd gone through the exploration phase for 6 months. We realized what was possible. Like we'd proven it to ourselves with the products we were bringing into market. And so we went to the rest of the organization and said, this is going to be important for us.
They knew this was a big deal, not just for their employees, but also for their product. Their goal was to get Zapier's 800 employees thinking about how AI could be augmenting their roles. They gave everyone a week to drop what they were doing and go and tinker. This included non-technical teams too. So not just developers, but everyone from HR to marketing to finance. And rather than tell them what to do, Mike and his team knew that they should be enabling their employees with education and space rather than a prescriptive plan. After all, their employees know their jobs better than anyone else. The collective intelligence of Zapier's employees would be able to iterate to value more quickly than prescriptive leadership direction. Another thing that Mike and his team excelled at was through the measurement of progress. During our chat, he shared an internal dashboard that showed the number of employees using AI per week. The goal was to understand how widespread AI adoption was. And this big jump in the middle here was when they hosted an internal hack week for employees to try out their first AI products. You can't really know if something is working if you don't end up measuring. Throughout the chat, Mike never described reducing his team size. In fact, he mentioned that they had already hired more developers focusing on AI. These were people that were engrossed in LLMs. They were figuring out how to apply this technology. And they were figuring out which techniques work and which techniques don't work. He really saw this as a third domain of engineer, in addition to the traditional front end and back end. But I was curious to hear more. I wanted to see how other businesses were thinking about AI product development and enabling their employees. So I sent out a tweet, and this resulted in 20 amazing user research interviews of best practices. And I want to go over with you what I learned through these 20 interviews as shared people with the common goal of creating more value with AI. How should we go about doing more augmentation before replacement at work? I use what I call the collective intelligence framework. And these are 4 key pieces that I've seen businesses implement to create real value with AI. The first one is the ideate phase. And this is simply when you're generating a lot of ideas internally about what you can be doing. And once you have these ideas, then you move over to the collaborate phase. And this is really all about increasing the throughput of idea sharing that you have. Next, well, we talked about pointing the right direction. You can have all these ideas. You can be sharing them, but if you're not pointing the right direction or going the right direction, you won't be measuring progress. And finally, because we're sharing so much more new data here, it's really all about safe and secure governance of that data. And each one is important, and I first want to dig into the ideate side. So the starting point is understanding that we shouldn't really try to make up new problems. Us as humans, we have the tendency to hear a cool idea in our head, think it's the best, and go and spend years trying to build it. But Paul Graham has a saying that I really love, and he calls these sitcom problem ideas. The reason why he calls them this is because these problems sound as if a sitcom writer had to write them. They sound good for TV, they sound plausible, but they would never actually work. The key insight is that more problems have actually been unlocked. And of course, when I hear this problem, I think of Silicon Valley, the TV show. The problems sound good on TV, but not in actual practice. There's 2 big ways to be gathering ideas at your company. And the first one is through the bottoms-up method. This is the internal collective intelligence way at your company. So you want to start with an ideas brainstorm with all of your employees. And this could be an employee survey going out to everybody. There are no wrong answers on how they think they could be using AI. The goal is to generate as many ideas as possible. Then leadership can sift through them and find out areas that they want to invest more. And this usually comes in the form of 3 different ways. They can either build right now because they want to own this technology internally. They can go out and spend money at the problem so they can go and buy. Or they can say, you know what, we're not ready to make a move yet. We're just going to wait. Or you can do the tops-down method. And this is more where you start with a thesis about how you think AI is going to be impacting the market. And then you work backwards from there. And you come up with a company hypothesis. Finally, then leadership with a hypothesis, they can make a move on whether or not they want to build, buy, or wait. This is the more theoretical way, but it takes a long-term view on change management. For example, an industry that might consider this method would be the call center industry, because no doubt language models, they know it's going to impact their business, but they may not be sure how quite yet. Once you have this list of ideas that you may want to test out, it's important revisiting your old problems to see which new capabilities language models give you that you may be able to tackle them with. So if we get tactical on these new capabilities that language models have, I think it's a really important exercise to kind of flush away the hype and really understand what are the new things that we can do. So getting extremely tactical, we can now generate a ton of text and a ton of code. And we know that the quality may not be where we need it to be exactly, but we will want to anticipate where this is going. Okay? Another huge capability that we have now is through semantic understanding and retrieval. This means that we're not doing keyword search anymore. We can actually start to match on meaning of text and code rather than just those keywords. We also have, and this is probably the one that blows my mind the most, we also have lightweight reasoning material or reasoning ability, which means we can start to ask the language model, hey, given these two options and given this scenario, which option do you think is best? It is a whole new flavor on conditional statements that we now have control over. We also have image and video generation and understanding. One of my favorite things to scroll Twitter on right now is to look at all of the GPT-4V demonstrations. People are throwing wild pictures and seeing what GPT-4 can come out with. So this is a huge new capability that we'll be able to use. And finally, the last one, which gets into the kind of freaky standpoint, but voice generation is almost a solved problem. It feels like we're in about the 96% mark for this issue here. Next up, we have the collaborate phase. So for this, I would prompt you to consider getting serious through an AI committee. So over 85% of those 25 companies that I talked to, they had started an AI committee. And this was an internal group of employees whose mission it was to figure out the company's reaction to AI. And the most successful ones were a formal CEO-backed program. I talked to a few that were just employees kind of self-organizing, but the best ones started with leadership up at the top. Now, if you have questions on this, I did an entire video on those 20 interviews that I did, explaining more details behind this. Next, I would also prompt you to consider making sure you have horizontal tools for your employees. You don't want to get locked into a vertical solution quite yet. Your teams should have a ChatGPT-like experience that is not being expensed on their personal cards. I heard a ton of people doing that. One of the beautiful things about the early days of AI is just how versatile these tools are across domains. For example, finance might share something with marketing, who might share something useful with legal. The key here is to understand, and again, this blows my mind, but natural language is the common denominator between roles. We're all speaking to each other. So you never know which departments are going to be able to help each other. And now we have this AI augmented approach. The goal is to increase the idea transfer that you're having between teams because we want to generate and evaluate more new ideas. Next up, on the measurement side, I look back to my previous background, which is in growth. So whenever I see a measurement problem, I like to approach it with a funnel mindset. Our goal isn't just to use AI because it's cool. We actually want to see value that's coming from it. So if we do a funnel, it's kind of like the Mike Knoop interview, what he showed. He started with thinking, well, how many employees do we have? How many of these employees are actually using AI? And of those employees using AI, what increased or decreased impacts are you seeing from those folks? And keep in mind that this could really come in the form of two different ways. There's the traditional way that we may all know, which is the quantitative side. Are you having more blog posts, more support requests, maybe more booked ARR, or your NPS scores are going up. But the one that I like is on the other side of the coin, which is the qualitative side. Are your employees just generally happier? How would they feel if they took your AI tools away? And the reason I like this one too is because there's a certain je ne sais quoi about how these tools are impacting employees. Lastly, we have the govern phase. And the most important thing with this is making sure that you're protecting your customers' data. OpenAI has publicly stated that they don't use the data you send to their models to train future models. However, it's really up to you to know if this is going to be enough for you and your company. And if it's not, well, you have plenty of ways that you can go and mess around with this. There's the traditional closed source models, which is the regular route that people use with OpenAI. But then you can also run open source models, but remotely with another provider. Or maybe you can go with the cloud provider that you're already working with and that you already love and trust. Or finally, if you want to get really crazy, well, then you'll go on-prem and you'll start to manage your own hardware. The next thing you want to consider is employee training. So you can't assume that your employees are going to know what to do with AI and that they'll be safe with it. You should be giving them data guidelines about what information is okay and not okay to be passing to third-party tools. Next, you want to identify AI champions within your org. Because like I said, you can have tops-down leadership support, but you really want this to be a grassroots movement within your org. And finally, it also really pays to invest in prompt engineering best practices. The reason for this is because if you don't, then you're hoping your employees will learn on their own, which, as a good friend tells me, hope is never a good strategy. Plus, then you'll reduce the chance of hallucinations. And speaking of hallucinations, you don't have to go very far to find examples for them. I like this one because someone asked, hey, ChatGPT, keep in mind, this is the most powerful model out there on the public right now. Is 450 90% of 500? Which the answer is yes. ChatGPT says no. 450% is not 90% of 500. To find 90% of 500, you can multiply 500 by 0.9, which gives you 450. Wait, actually, yes. 450 is 90% of 500. My apologies for the confusion. Luckily, it caught itself on this one because it was thinking out loud, but there are tons of instances where it doesn't. I have one more story for you, but before I let you go, I first want to thank you for participating, and I want to thank you for allowing me to show my mid-journey photos to you. Before I wrap up today, I also want to say that I would love to get to know what you're doing a little bit more. I host monthly roundups that I cap at 3 different people, and at these chats, we talk about people's businesses, their AI goals, employee adoption, and product roadmaps with regards to AI. Now, there's a link down here in the bottom right, and if you're curious to get these slides or the Mike Knoop interview that I did or other AI adoption tutorials that I do where I teach developers how to use LangChain to build their first applications, link is right down there. Cool. So to further drive this point home, one last thing that I'll leave you with is a tweet, again, from Sam Altman. He emphasizes an important point here. These systems are much better at doing tasks than jobs. And giving people better tools to do their work faster often leads to qualitative changes in what they can do. Here's the thing. We all have a shared goal of building more value for others, and we now have this new shiny AI object to help us do our best work. But the current status quo still has problems. We're picking solutions out of thin air to find problems that really fail to keep them going. The result is a hype cycle of claims and Twitter demos that will likely not make it to production. The hidden truth is that we still have our same problems as before. And spoiler alert, those problems don't include, let me replace my copywriter. Instead, we should be thinking about augmentation before replacement. instead of replacing entire roles at your company. To do this, companies should be using the collective intelligence of their employees to ideate, collaborate, measure, and govern the adoption of internal AI at their companies. When we collaborate openly and focus on augmentation before replacement, we can create real value with AI. So let's do this by starting small, iterating, and dreaming big. Thank you very much.